So we now come to planning application number 2 on the agenda. That is planning number 20233869, and the location is at Hainford. It is Acorn Farm on Newton Road. And the report starts from page 32 on the agenda. And we have Richard Smith, Principal Planning Officer, here to give the presentation. And next to him we have Ali Pridmore, who is the Environmental Protection Officer, who has kindly come to answer questions, I believe, if we have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application for the retention of a barn building, primarily as it deviates from the application drawings of an earlier approved application, and its change of use retrospectively for the processing, storage and distribution of logs. So this is the Acorn Farm curtilage. It amounts to around 1.4 hectares and sits to the northwest of residential properties in Hainford at Newton Road. This is the aerial view of the site courtesy of Google Mapping. It shows the barn as arrowed, which is set close to the southern boundary of the site. At its nearest point, it is around 40 metres to the nearest neighbouring residential boundary. This Google Maps Street View image shows the view from Newton Road, the view towards the southwest. The building in question is indicated where the red arrow is. This slide shows the barn and hard standing and the position relative to the existing access off Newton Road. The barn is shown in blue and the hard standing to the north of it. The structure was approved, as I mentioned earlier, under an application in 2020 for agricultural purposes as a hay barn stroke isolation barn for the then circa 70 cattle herd on the farm. In more recent times, pygmy goats have been kept, and these are understood to have been kept for sale as pets, but the applicant has stated a potential desire to trade in goat meat also as a niche market in the future. Also present on the wider site are various farm buildings to the north boundary of the site in particular. This is the plan arrangement of the barn as now proposed built. This involves a log splitter, which is a tractor-driven operated machine. The logs are also split into smaller sections, and there is some chainsaw activity to help prepare the logs as part of the process. The barn is open to the north side, enclosed on the other sides with hit and miss fencing. These elevations show the building as it was approved in 2020 as a hay barn isolation barn. And this slide shows the elevations as now proposed stroke built. The differences between the 2020 consented barn and that as now built are set out in the report at paragraph 5.15. Overall, the site area of the barn as erected is less than that as previously approved. It is now at around 437 metres squared as opposed to 451 metres squared as originally approved. The depth is, however, greater by 2.4 metres. However, the width is narrower at 36.4 metres wide rather than 56.4 metres wide. Some photos now. These photos show the following. On the left, you've got a hard standing view towards Newton Road. To the east, with a mobile home accommodation in view. The middle photo shows logs stored and construction of the barn with the hit and miss sides to the southern, east and west sides. The right photo shows the tractor with the log splitting machinery. These are some further photos. Again, these are from January this year. They show the building here looking south and southwest in particular. This image on the left shows a view east from the edge of the hard standing towards the access on Newton Road. And to the right image, this view is towards the west, and the west towards the area of open land which has been previously used for cattle before their departure from the site. Now back onto Newton Road on the east side. This street view shows the relationship of the residential development that lines Newton Road, with the barn buildings set to the west of these, beyond the rear gardens of these residential properties. So as set out in the report, Chair, the application is recognised and recommended for refusal, specifically related to the use set in close proximity to residential property and the resultant effect upon their amenity. The use is of an industrial nature and it's considered to form an unacceptable level of noise pollution, contrary to policy 2.7, subject to section 7 of the GNLP, and Broadland Development Management Policies GC4, relating particularly to the impact on amenity of existing properties, and policy EN4 on pollution considerations generally, as the proposal is considered to have a significant adverse effect on the amenity. The application is also considered to be contrary to the guidance within the National Planning Policy Framework, particularly around Chapter 15 on conserving and enhancing the natural environment, in this case at paras 180E and 191A. As you mentioned, Chair, we do have, in addition to public speakers today, we have a colleague from Environmental Protection, should you have any specific queries around the operation from a noise perspective that I can't answer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We could now come to questions for the officer. So, Councillor Hempsall.
Thank you, Chairman. So, is the objection only relating to the use or the building itself? That's...
So, yeah, it's just the use. The retention of the building, although it deviates slightly from the approved plans of the 2020 application, is not sufficient to warrant any concerns in terms of the recommendation. So the recommendation is just purely around the use rather than the actual retention of the building.
Councillor Copleston.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Richard, for that. I had a quick look at the application for the large agricultural building that was only put in it was 2020 428. I'm quite satisfied that the building is smaller than originally had been planned in that application. But as an authority, we granted permission for an agricultural building, and I would say that this is a more industrial use. I know agricultural buildings are exempt from things like business rates, but this had a very short-lived life as a cattle building, because I understand from the report in about 2021 the applicant then decided to change from cattle into an industrial sort of logging business or a sawmill. I don't quite know how to term that. I also notice on the site that the Acorn Farm, which I presume is as the farmhouse, is adjacent the agricultural barn, but there also seems to be several mobile homes there as well. Is the applicant living in the farmhouse, and who resides in the mobile homes? And were these all put in place? I mean, have they got agricultural restrictions on these temporary accommodation? Because patently there isn't much agricultural use for this site, and I think if goats are being reared to become pets, it's again not particularly an agricultural use, and that really concerns me. I looked at the notes from Ali, and I understand the applicant has refused a noise impact assessment, and that is very concerning as well, because I think had we had this information as a committee, we will be able to more fully understand the problems with this. So I'd like further clarification on the short use of the agricultural building, and also about the Acorn Farm building, and which is now several mobile homes, I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, obviously we've got the applicant here so they can further elaborate, but my understanding is that obviously the farm building was erected in 2020. I think obviously the world changed in 2021 with the Ukraine invasion. I understand that it was based on the increase in incoming feed for the cattle that presented the difficulties in terms of the ongoing cattle business, and that's hence why the farm then sort of diversified, if you like, into this log splitting. I think diversification is very tricky because obviously I think as the largest building on site, it's not just diversification. There is quite an element of a use there that should be seen over and above the agricultural operation, which has pretty much ceased. But having said that, we have got a number of farm buildings that have been in use previous to that, so they could in theory be reused for agricultural purposes. The actual mobile homes, they are restricted in terms of their use related to the agricultural unit. There was no sort of original farmhouse, as I understand it. The two mobile units were brought on site. Often it's not unusual to have some sort of a close accommodation to cattle for sort of security and sort of monitoring purposes, but they were obviously given temporary consent to relate to that ongoing operation as an agricultural business. So obviously as an industrial use, the mobile homes wouldn't necessarily need to be in close proximity for their purpose like they were for the agricultural, original agricultural intention. So yes, that's the sort of history of the site. I think in terms of obviously the ongoing operation of that building, our view is that diversification is important to help farms, but obviously we are struggling to see a level of farm activity that we could reasonably say is a diversification. It's more of a sort of change in use altogether of the overall site.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask a small supplementary question about the occupation of the mobile homes. They were obviously done, as you said, on an agricultural basis, and I just wonder what the term was, the tenure of those. How long can they be occupied for agricultural use, given that it's very tenuous whether there is actually any agricultural use going on at this small holding? Thank you.
So they have a consent until November next year. The first one was approved in 2016. That's where the resident lives, and that was extended in January 2020, and that's where we come up to the November 2025 temporary consent. The second one, I understand, was a result of a family member who came into ill health, came onto the site, and that's resided in the second one. And again, that runs as a temporary consent till November 2025. So both consistent in terms of their duration, but yes, they are on a temporary period. And that's not unusual for these sort of types of accommodation. But obviously, the expectation would be to sort of review the matters in terms of how the farm's doing and how the farm's trading, as to whether we look at something longer term.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the committee? No? Okay, thank you. We now move to our public speaking session. We don't have anyone from the parish council or any objectors, so we move to supporters later. Yes, so local member comes after on the list. Thank you. So we now have do we have Mr. John Spencer here?
Yes, ma'am.
And we have Mr. Andrew Watts as well. So should we take Mr. Spencer first? And thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes to speak. And to speak, you just press the right-hand button on the microphone, and I will let you know when you've got just 1 minute left.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name is John Spencer. I was acting as agents for this application. and thank you for allowing me to address the committee today. Can I just explain first off how we arrived at this point? Mr. Watts, my client, he was running this farm since 2014. He's raised calves, kept beef cattle, cared for horses, and lately raised goats. To complement his income, he started to process and sell firewood from the farm gate around 2021. This has continued to date. It fits in well with his other farming activities, and he estimates he's able to spend around 3 hours per day cutting and splitting wood. On the 23rd of November, we received an email from Mr. Tollett, who I believe is the enforcement officer, advising him that after consultation with his colleagues and looking at policies, they believe that the log processing would constitute a change of use, and as such, planning consent would be required. The email went on to say, as you have an existing agricultural access and turning area, our environmental health officer has stated the noise is unlikely to be an issue. We have policies that support the diversification of agricultural use. Whilst they can't give you any guarantee of planning permission would be granted for change use, the application would stand a reasonable chance of success. He then went on to say he would invite an application to be submitted for a change of use of agricultural land to a mixed use of agricultural and log processing distribution. Mr. Watts contacted me and asked me to visit his farm. I visited him on the 15th of December. He asked me to prepare the necessary application on his behalf, and I was surprised at that stage that it was even considered necessary for an application to be made, as it fit in so well with his normal farm activities, but nevertheless I was happy to prepare an application. The application was made on the 23rd of December and worded exactly as Mr. Tollett's advice. On the 10th of January, the planning officer, Mrs. Fox, emailed me to request with a request from the environmental health officer for a noise assessment he submitted. This was forwarded to my client, who contacted the environmental quality officer, I think Mr. Grimmer, and he visited the site and viewed the operation. He determined there was no need for a noise assessment. I asked for written confirmation for this, and I was given it by Mrs. Fox on the 18th of January in an email form. I was copied in with an exchange of slightly acrimonious emails between the planning officer and Councillor Ward regarding the nature of the application, but I assumed this had been resolved between themselves as the last email concluding my application was submitted correctly. I received no further correspondence until the 21st of February, when I was asked, amongst other things, to revise the application by changing the description, providing additional drawings, etc. I was obviously wrong about the resolution between Councillor Ward and the planning officer. Although these changes affected the whole emphasis of the application from a small farm related activity to an industrial unit, which it clearly did not form an industrial unit, I did of course provide the additional information requested. I was however later reassured by Mrs. Fox in an email of the 22nd of February that she was sorry that this application being more complicated and hoped that I could see that we were moving forward towards an approval. I was very surprised at this stage to see again the question of noise had arisen. This time requesting information about electric chainsaw, which Mr. Watts had offered to purchase to be used in the place of his petrol chainsaw. It was also suggested that hitting-less cladding to the 3 outside walls could be changed to closed boarding by means of infilling the ventilation gaps. This would have been quite expensive and counterproductive. I did explain the building was used solely for the storage of processed wood, and the cross ventilation afforded by the hit-and-miss cladding was essential for the continued drying process of the processed wood. I assume this explanation was sufficient.
You have 1 minute left.
Thank you. I believe I did make it clear that the wood processing plant that cuts and splits wood is situated outside the building and beneath the canopy. It would have been impossible to load the wood if that were inside. We therefore strongly refute the comments by the environmental quality officer, who claims we refused to undertake a noise impact. He had already confirmed in January that one was not necessary. We did not refuse to infill the timber cladding. I merely offered an explanation as to why it's important not to. The only reason for this application appears to be, for the refusal of this application, appears to be an alleged unacceptable noise level. This is certainly not the case. The environmental quality officer who inspected in January said a noise assessment was not required. Nothing has changed the process, so we're at a loss to understand why it appears to have changed his mind. The only conclusion we can come to is the three objectors' letters all mentioned noise. Only through objection, despite concerted efforts to rally support by distributing flyers around the village, encouraging individuals to object. We have 5 letters in support of the application, one even claiming it's quieter now the cattle had not been housed in the barn. I find the proposal as being an acceptable form of development. Sorry, I ask you to find this proposal being an acceptable form of development on a rural farm in a rural area in accordance with the council's own policy on diversification, and grant approval, which allows my client to continue farming and supporting his family. Thank you. Sorry if it was a bit rushed, but the 5 minutes isn't long.
Yes, no, thank you very much for coming to speak. Do we have any questions from the committee, Mr. Spencer? Yes, Councillor Orber.
Oh.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Well, where do I start with this one? So, there is a change of use of this building from what it was to what it is now. My understanding is that obviously it's the noise pollution that's causing the issue. Can you just confirm to me what hours of operation then he wants to use or needs to use this piece of equipment?
We put on the application that between 9 and 12, so 3 hours a day maximum. He's not using a chainsaw in that time. It is used occasionally in that time. That's been explained in emails to the council. He does use his log splitter machine, which the environmental health officer has viewed and said it didn't need a noise assessment. I have an email confirming that.
Thank you. Why does it say here then that it's been used as early as 7:30?
I think my client can answer that better, but he will say it has not been used as early as 7:30. He has young children, or a young child. He doesn't start that time. His first job in the morning is dealing with his animals, and that's what he does. I don't know where the 7:30's come from. I don't know whether it's been sound recorded or what. I have no information whatsoever about anything happening on that basis.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions for the speaker? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming to speak. I'd like to call Mr. Andrew Watts. Would you like to speak? Yeah? You have 5 minutes from when you start to speak, and I will let you know when you've just got 1 minute left. Okay, thank you.
First of all, thanks for letting me have my speech on this. Firstly, I'd like to say my passion is and always will be working with livestock. It's extremely important for me to raise my 3 young children on the farm. Unfortunately, it's become increasingly difficult to make a living from this alone. Processing and selling firewood part-time has provided a much-needed income that still allows me to be on site to breed and sell goats for the animals and raising my children in the outdoor lifestyle it brings. I currently have over 150 goats in 3 buildings, so it is very much being used for raising animals. The wood processing is purely 3 hours a day. I feel this application has become much more complicated than it should have been and at times portrayed unfairly. It is very clear to see from the content of objections that they have more than just a problem with the firewood processing. It has become very personal. The complainants have continuously made complaints to the council, trading standards in DEFRA ranging from animal noise and smells to animal welfare and flooding. Each time we have been visited, the feedback has been that our farm is clean, tidy, quiet, and the animals are very well cared for. They have also circulated untruths around the village, encouraging people to object to this application. The persistent complaints, phone calls and visits from authorities left me with no option but to contact the police filing a complaint about filing a complaint about harassment. Since being spoken to by the police, lucky enough, the complainants have stopped complaining. I would suggest their behaviour discredits their comments. The environment officer who attended informed me that he had been keeping an eye on our property for 2 weeks. This is the gentleman here, had been keeping an eye on our property for 2 weeks at different times of the day without my knowledge, and had never heard any noise coming from the farm. Comments in section 4.4 are misleading. I did not refuse to undertake a noise survey or refuse to fill in the gaps on the barn panels. I simply raised concerns over them being costly and counterproductive. I also have not used a chainsaw at 7:30 a.m. There is no evidence of this. I start at 7 a.m. where it takes me 3 hours to do my animals. A chainsaw is sometimes used to reduce the size of a piece of wood that doesn't fit in the processor, and the processor itself produces very little noise. We live in a village where most people have large properties and plots that use power tools like hedge trimmers, chainsaws and strimmers for maintenance. Is a regular occurrence. I would ask how objections that have come from mainly one resident can so heavily outweigh the support from many others, and kindly ask you to please consider the impact it will have on myself and my family should I be unable to continue with the wood processing. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to speak. We have questions. Councillor Copleston.
Thank you, Mr. Watts. It was interesting to hear your comments and that of your agent. You have a significant goat herd at 150 animals. Looking at the report, I just thought it was a small number. And you've kept livestock for 7 years before the change to...
Probably longer than that, to be honest. We moved on site in 2014, so probably 10 years, really.
Thank you, thank you.
I'm not going to speak, I'm sorry. Which one is
No, that's all right. No. So it is quite a significant holding. It's been said that you have 1.4 hectares of land in your small holding. Do you have other land that you've grazed your goats and stuff on, or is that the sum of your small holding?
Right, can you hear me? Yeah, sorry. So I've got 3 really large buildings on site which have all had been passed for planning permission for animals. So the goats, they mainly, so we bring all stuff in for them, like willow, all different trees and bits and pieces. They graze. There's a 2-acre paddock out the back which they graze on, and they go in and out the buildings as they want. Goats mainly eat hay, so they're mainly eating hay. So they're not like a cow. This is why I went into breeding goats, because the food they take, there's nothing like what cattle take trying to fatten cattle. So the reason I've gone into goats is because they will live on hay, basically, and through the spring and summer months, they're turned out on the backfield, which is all fenced in, and they come in and out, picking at the grass, picking at the bushes, and then go in night times for their hay.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's really interesting. So it is a small holding of 1.4 hectares. Do you use your new agricultural building, the one in question, for storage of any of your goat feed or hay or anything like that? Because it would be nice to establish that there is agricultural use of this building and it's not just industrial.
Yeah, so the main building is, that's all open fronted, and there's logs which have been brought in, which are waiting to be processed, and the goats love the bark on them, so the goats are climbing up on all top of like the big piles of like logs and stuff like that, because goats love bark, and they strip all the bark off them, so predominantly the goats are going in and out the building as and when they like, because they don't produce much mess, goats don't. So literally like a few currants, but they're always up on top of the big piles of wood, like chewing the bark off. Any bit they're just goats are foragers, so they're always eating all the bits of bark off the floor, and so they are going in and out of the building as such. And on hot days, they do go in there and lay on the concrete floor. That's not just for wood processing, as I say, because the goats will wander in and out and come and stand round us while we're wood processing, and they're just, yeah, so that the goats do go in and out of the building as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have a question. So if you look at the income from your business, approximately what proportion comes from the log business as opposed to the goats?
My speaker on. What I've done for the last 2 years since I've been keeping goats is I've been keeping a lot of the young nannies back, which are the females, which are my future breeding stock. So last year I sold 70 young goats at a profit. So at the minute, they're relatively young with my goats. So I would say the wood processing probably brings in about a quarter of my income. The rest of it would be through the goats, although I am keeping a lot of my stock back at the moment to breed from. So I've been selling the billy goats, which are the castrated males, and I've been keeping the females back, which are going to be my future breeding stock.
So thinking about that, how do you envisage the business going forward if the goat business takes off, gets more profitable? How much will you continue with the logging business?
But as I said, my passion is working with livestock, and I love working with livestock, and from a young age I've always enjoyed doing it. And I have done cattle and I've done horses, but all these things, I have to try all these different things, and hopefully I've hit on a bit of a niche market with the goats. They're not being sold as pets, they are being sold as farm animals. So I've supplied places like Mellsop Farm and all different places like that who have my goats. I'm hoping to go into the goat meat trade, which is around this area. There's not much call for around this area, but I have spoke to the boss of the local abattoir, who said he would be happy to take some meat goats off me as and when I get it up and running.
So, sorry, I have another question about the business. So, if this planning application was approved, and your hours of use were strictly limited between 9 and 12 noon for the log splitting business, Monday to Friday, with no operation on weekends or bank holidays, and strict delivery times as well, that would be worth it still to you, would it, in terms of the business operations?
Well, certainly, because some days, sometimes I don't even cut firewood up. That could be, we may leave it alone for up to 2 weeks at a time, because I'm busy with the animals, busy worming them, especially in kidding times when the goats are kidding. I don't touch the firewood probably for a month to 5 weeks, because we're right in the middle of kidding season. There's goats giving birth everywhere, so I'm not even touching the firewood. That's a very, very small operation. That's just been portrayed into becoming this big industrial operation, which it is clearly not. And I'd welcome any of you to come and visit my farm and see all the goats, and just see. Hopefully, this is what I want to do full time, and if I can work with animals full time and make it pay full time with the goats and get the goat meat job organised, then the firewood, I'm very happy with just doing it part time, because that is just bringing in a small income for me at the moment.
And one more question, if that's okay. So, the noise assessment.
Yeah.
If this application was approved, would you be willing to have a noise assessment done?
No problem whatsoever. Of course I would.
Okay,
And
thank
I was just going to just say, I never ever start at 7. I start on the farm at 7:30 in the morning. I never start with a chainsaw. I mean, there's no evidence to say I started shouting. I wouldn't, out of the respect for my neighbours, who I get on very well with, obviously apart from the one objector, I wouldn't start a chainsaw at that time in the morning, out of respect for my neighbours anyway. A chainsaw has been used, admittedly, but I wouldn't use a petrol chainsaw at that time in the morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Copleston.
Thank you, Mr. Watts. Just another point of clarification. I notice in the report that some of the objectors say some hedges have been removed, and obviously hedges and trees offer some noise dampening. If this application was actually approved, would you be happy to instate some hedges at all under maybe a stewardship scheme, just to help locally and show some goodwill to the neighbours? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I wouldn't. I'm a wildlife lover myself, and that when we bought that site, which is approximately 3 acres, 10 years ago, I put in around it, so like hawthorn, blackthorn, all like native species. So the site has got a big hedge all the way around it. I encourage wildlife onto the site. I love the wildlife coming on site, and we do attract the birds and everything. So I am very much an animal lover. We just now planted loads of like different trees like out as well, like willows and stuff for the goats because they love willow. So and I put a few willow trees in and stuff like that. And the hedges, I would say I did cut one part of the hedge down, but the rest of the hedge, which is behind the building, and that is probably about, I'd say probably 8 foot tall at the moment. Whereas before there was no hedge at all. So when we bought the site, that cost me a lot of money to plant all natural hedging all the way around the site. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? No. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming to speak.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening to me.
And now we have the local district councillor for the area, Councillor Shane Ward. Thank you. And you have 5 minutes to speak. I'll let you know when you've got 1 minute left. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've actually listened to some audio recordings of the noise that's coming from the processing, and the residents tell me that they can no longer use their garden because of the level of the noise, and the audio recording is taken from one of those back gardens, and I had to say that the noise was quite considerable. The building in which the saw is housed was originally intended as a shelter for livestock. The residents felt that the building, even then, was too close to them. But as the building is not designed to house and operate a saw or a log splitter, the building amplifies the noise, acting almost as an amphitheatre. Worse still, the building also sits in a field where the noise is unblocked, creating an acoustic megaphone of what I would consider to be deafening proportions. The resident contacted me in March 2024, having already suffered months of severe noise pollution. Paragraph 5.7 in the report states that the application site is close to residential properties and the impact upon the occupants of nearby homes from this industrial type of use must be taken into consideration. But what the report does not show is revealed, I understand, in objection letters, is the level of the impact of the ongoing noise that has had on some of the residents' mental health and well-being. They tell me they do not want to move, but feel that they are being driven from their homes because it is that bad. So the residents are objecting to the retrospective planning application, and they also indicated recently that they would also like consideration for a noise abatement order. And that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Councillor Ward? Yes, Councillor.
Councillor Ward, we don't have a noise assessment report. So when you said they were very loud, do we know how loud? I mean, how loud is loud?
So in terms of decibel level, there's never been a recording of it, but as I understand it, a saw is basically sort of around about 85 decibels and above, which already would exceed anything from a residential area, and because the building is so close, that just makes it significantly worse. The fact that the material that the building is made of therefore amplifies that acoustics. So that means that the decibel level is that much louder. So it goes well and above what would be considered an acceptable level.
Thank you. I wonder if at this point I could ask if Mr. Pridmore might be able to give us some indication, because a lot of this hinges on the noise, the effect of noise on the amenity of neighbouring residents. Thank you.
Hopefully my speaker will work. That's working. Yeah. So I'll give you a very quick run through of my visit, which I undertook on the 21st of November last year. I attended with Nick Tollett, Planning Enforcement Officer, and William Smith, who's a Planning Enforcement apprentice, or is an apprentice but planning. During that visit, I met Mr. Watts, and he was happy to show us around. It was an unannounced visit, so it was on spec. So whilst we were there, I asked Mr. Watts if he would kindly operate the log splitter, which he did. He operated that for several minutes. I didn't think the noise from the log splitter was particularly loud. The character of the noise wasn't something that was particularly annoying in character. So I did check at the boundary, did a monitoring at the boundary with the nearest property. I didn't think that was excessive particularly, or particularly annoying. I asked Mr. Watts to operate the chainsaw, which he did. That was very loud, as most chainsaws are, and the character of the chainsaw noise is what you would expect, really quite annoying in character. And I did ask Mr. Watts if he would voluntarily start the chainsaw operations after 9 o'clock in the morning, and he said he would do that. So that was a welcome thing from Mr. Watts. In consultation with Mr. Grimmer, who's the Environmental Quality Officer who commented on the application, I did feel that, obviously from the chainsaw noise point of view in particular, there needed to be some noise control. So either a quieter chainsaw of some description, or a means of containing the sound within the area that the chainsaw was being operated. So I would say the building itself, although buildings can operate as amplifiers in certain respects, the biggest problem with the building where the chainsaw operations are taking place isn't that the building's acting as an amplifier, it's the fact that it's essentially a colander. There's holes in it, there's gaps. So what you essentially are getting from that structure is a massive breakout of sound, essentially. There isn't much containment. And Mr. Grimmers did ask about, obviously, infilling, close boarding the structure where necessary, obviously with the boundary, to try and reduce the transmission or propagation of sound from that structure into neighbouring properties or across into neighbouring properties. So I think with some control over that aspect, that activity, I felt that was a possibility that would be reasonable, or be some control sufficiently to allow that activity to continue. My understanding at some point was that there was an offer or a request to carry out a noise assessment, and that Mr. Watts or his representative had not taken up that offer, or had refused that offer to do the noise impact assessment. So just with regards to monitoring, Mr. Watts is absolutely right. 2 weeks before I visited, I did do some unannounced monitoring. So while I was in the area, I would sit there, have a listen, just to see, get a feel for how loud it was and maybe how frequently it occurred. And there wasn't really anything much to report, to be honest. I have done subsequent monitoring. I've done quite a few visits, and I have heard the chainsaw operating a couple of times, not for very long. It was loud, as expected, as it previously was. Again, that doesn't really change my view on my initial sort of opinion on there should be some controls put in place. That just reinforced what I already thought. I would say I'm not aware of. I've heard assertions that Mr. Watts operates his chainsaw at 7:30. I haven't seen that when I've been out in the mornings. I'm aware that the operations have occurred before 9, so 8:20, 8:30 in the morning. That does occur sometimes, and I think that has upset some of the residents. Their view is, well, if Mr. Watts can't stick to the 9 o'clock, then you can't really take his word. I think that's possibly unfair, but I can sort of see their perspective as well at times. So, yeah, in terms of the impact, even for 3 hours a day, unless that noise from the chainsaw in particular is controlled, there is the harm to amenity and would affect people's use and enjoyment of their property. And I'll finish off just by mentioning that there was a request by Councillor Ward about a request for an abatement order. We don't issue abatement orders, the Magistrates Court would do that. We would serve an abatement notice if we are satisfied that the noise from the site is a statutory nuisance. We are not satisfied that the noise from the site is a statutory nuisance at this point. We feel it's an amenity issue, or there's definitely a prospect of an amenity issue affecting residents. So we have not established a nuisance, therefore we will not be serving an abatement notice at this time. And part of that is we have asked to install noise equipment in people's properties, because we really need to assess it from people's properties, how they are affected, how their use and enjoyment of their property is being affected. There has been a reluctance from people locally for us to do that, and I understand why. I totally understand why. You know, and which is why I've done the monitoring to try and establish whether the noise is sort of regularly occurring, it's occurring at unreasonable times of the day, and what likely impact it would have, and whether it could be a statutory nuisance. So far it's not, but that's not to say it couldn't be. It's just we haven't established that it is a nuisance at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Hempsall.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Pridwood, so in your opinion, would it be possible to make this application acceptable in planning by means of condition?
Yes, I think you can. Yeah. I think with suitable control measures put in place, mitigation, I think there's a possibility that obviously there's a possibility of approving the application and provide a level or measure of protection for residents.
Sorry, I'm just going to ask a question of Ali as well, if that's okay. If that was the line that we took and we got to that point, would you want a noise assessment ahead of any conditions being put on?
Yes, I would.
Okay, so just to put in members' minds that what Ali's saying is that we would want a noise assessment beforehand to consider, to then be able to condition the outcomes of that noise assessment. So I'm preempting where we might get to, but if we were to get to a point of looking to approve it, I would suggest that members might want to defer it to get a noise assessment submitted so that we can then condition it appropriately from there.
Yes,
would that be entirely possible, or should the committee be minded to, we could delegate approval subject to the noise impact, because I don't think you want to be bringing this back to committee. You know, this is an expensive process, and you know, if in principle there is an agreement, but a technical detail that is involved, would that not be acceptable to you, Ben?
That would be fine with me.
Yes, Councillor Copleston.
I think this has been really disappointing that this has come to planning committee actually. This young family and Mr Watts has sort of had livestock for most of his career. He's trying to make a living here, and Broadland District Council have a tradition of supporting small businesses. And I think actually after listening to, I mean, when I first read the report, I thought there's no agricultural activity happening on this small holding, but there patently is. And the log splitting business is ancillary to the agricultural use. So I am disappointed, and I would like to see the committee approve the application, conditioned by the planning officer, the assistant director of planning. I don't want to see this deferred because I don't think it's fair to the applicant to defer this for months when he needs to earn a living to support his young family. So I would like to see this conditioned and with the recommendations Ali Pridmore has made. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Orber.
Thank you, Chair. In my opinion, I don't think there's no way I could approve this without getting some sort of noise assessment, because I've got no idea how noisy it is. There seems to be a lot of disagreement over how noisy it is and how long things are going on for. So I think, as far as I'm concerned, I can't do anything until there's some sort of a noise assessment. I'm happy for the proposal to be either deferred or for us to say, you know, subject to a noise assessment, delegated authority for you guys to deal with it. But there's no way that you can approve or reject it at the moment because we haven't got the information.
Councillor Copleston.
I completely disagree with Councillor Orber. I think we've already heard that the applicant is willing to put some noise dampening in. He's also bought an electric chainsaw. He only operates that chainsaw between 9 and 12 on weekdays. I think that's fairly reasonable. We live in the countryside. Agriculture is a big part of our income locally, and I think this is just an ancillary thing. I can't see that anyone would be operating a chainsaw for 3 hours solid. This is an occasional use of the chainsaw between limited hours, and I think it's unreasonable for us to defer this and stop the applicant maintaining his business at a time of year when we're going into the autumn and he wants to supply logs to local people. So I think that's completely unreasonable. And if you look at the representations from local people, there are a lot of people that say that the business is very useful to local people. So I would like to move that we approve the application and recommend it to not be deferred, but to work on the and not wait for the noise impact assessment, but go with a condition of planning as stated by Mr Pridmore and the Assistant Director of Planning. Thank you.
Yeah, we are still debating this application, but we have now got a proposal that we approve this application not subject to a noise assessment, or approve an application and delegate other responsibilities. Is that correct? So, Councillor Hempsall.
Thank you, Chairman. So I think I have the greatest respect for Richard as planning officer and what you've done here. I think, am I correct that your main sticking points with the change of use of this building to what it is used now is that this would not be a diversification and hence was contrary to policy, and there were issues with noise. Is that correct? Were those your main policy issues with this? Just
yes, I mean, I think it's a tricky one because I listened to all the comments. I think the agricultural side of it is hard for us because obviously if you were selling pygmy goats as pets, you wouldn't necessarily look at that as agricultural per se. But I would suggest that, you know, there's a viable business there, you know, and I accept that there's a diversification of sorts from the beef cattle. And I accept the reasons why the applicant's gone from rearing cattle because of feed prices and how goats are different. If he's going into selling the goats for meat production, and that helps sort of maybe go back a little bit to agricultural use. I would suggest that the other things that were mentioned, point for clarification, we as far as I'm aware, we don't have a battery powered chainsaw. That's something that we have looked at trying to agree with Mr. Watson. There has been some potential interest from Mr. Watson doing that. That would potentially help a lot with the noise. There are different models, I understand, and the model that was offered by the agent, which is a particular model, does have quite a high decibel rating. So we might need to look at, in conjunction with Mr. Watson, model that was reasonably viable for him, but also provided the sound reduction measures that we're after from the petrol model that he currently operates. So there are controls that potentially we could look at as part of conditions. But yes, it was the overall change of use of that building. So I think even any sort of, you know, storage of for agricultural terms of that building, whether it's hay or whatever it is, for the ongoing future of the site for agricultural terms could help us sort of obviously understand that the diversification is a fairly small element, but at the moment it does feel quite a large building, and obviously it is having quite an impact.
Yes, Councillor Hempsall.
so, I think my points would therefore be that Mr. Pridmore has suggested that the noise aspect of the proposal could be addressed by condition, and I do accept that in order for those conditions to be, you know, applicable, viable and meaningful to not just to the applicant but to the local residents, that a noise impact assessment does have to be conducted, because otherwise you simply can't make a sensible decision. I would argue that those are technical discussions that are, you know, particular to specialist officers in this area. I'm wondering, Richard, whether you would accept that this is a diversification of the business based on the applicant perhaps producing the books and what the income is from various aspects of the building. And I would also suggest that a strict condition would be applied, as the chairman has suggested, a Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 12 noon at most, to be used for the log splitting saw business, whatever it is. And you know, additionally, Mr. Pridmore, I wonder if, you know, means of enclosure of the sides of that building that are most exposed to neighbouring properties, you know, if those form part of your considerations. I mean, as I said, those technical details are beyond the, you know, the layman knowledge of myself and potentially some, I'm not going to speak for everybody, but definitely mine, areas of expertise. But I think, you know, if Councillor Copplestone was minded to accept my points of discussion, I'd like to second her proposal.
Yes, Chair, I'm happy to accept everything that Councillor Hempsall has said, and I agree that's a very good course, you know, good way forward for this application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So are you, Councillor Copplestone, are you still the proposer?
I'm the proposer. Councillor
And Councillor Hempsall is the seconder. So we have on the table a proposal that we approve this application subject to a noise assessment and any other conditions that are deemed necessary by our environmental team. Is that acceptable?
Can I just...
Could I just say that I'd like to delegate authority to the to the Assistant Director for Planning to approve, subject to the noise impact assessment and conditions being put in place that don't put the neighbouring amenity at risk. I think that's what I was going for, Chairman.
Councillor Vincent, did you want to say something? I think
I had hoped to say something as part of the debate, but I feel like we're almost at the end of it. So, could I just say something? I guess taking it back a little bit concerned. This is before us today, having now heard very different positioning of some of the issues. I go back to the key considerations before us, and there's 4 of them in 5.1. The principle of proposal, which is around the diversification, and it's said in here, some diversification of farm business may be acceptable in this location. So, given that that's deemed acceptable, that satisfies me. The second one is impact on neighbour amenity. We've had a big discussion about that, and clearly there is an impact with the chainsaw. If the mitigation could be those control of hours, that would seem reasonable to me, provided they are enforced and adhered to. The third one is design and impact on the character of the area, and I referred to the report. That concludes that the site is not overdeveloped, there is no significant adverse visual impacts, so it is in accordance with policy 2 of the GNLP and policy GC4 of the DMDPD. I will come back to that in terms of the bordering and the hedgerow. And the final one was highway safety, and we find in the report there is no objection in terms of highway safety. So of those 4 key considerations, I feel satisfied that 3 of them are addressed. So it's just back to the neighbouring amenity. Fully support the proposal with the amendments that put forward, but I would like one further amendment, and that is reinstatement of the hedgerow bordering the adjacent dwelling, where we have had a consultee concern who have said that they would support full planning of this application, but would request that hedgerow is reinstated, which was cut down earlier this year. So I would ask that that's added, please.
would you be happy to add that to the proposal? There's just one thing that I don't know if this is possible, but whether it's possible to approve planning permission but put a time limit on that. Is it possible to do that, for example, a year or 2 years, so that the situation can be reviewed? So in other words, if we approved it, we'd be approving it maybe for a year, for review within a year under delegated authority.
We can do, Chair. We have a proposal in front of us. I think at the moment we should consider that at the appropriate time, and then if that's not, well, I'll leave it to you to discuss with the members as to whether they want to put a year's control on it, or if they're comfortable subject to us looking at it with the noise assessment and the potential conditions that it could operate ad infinitum.
How do you feel about that as proposed?
Thank you, Chair. That's a very good point, and I would be happy to delegate that to the Assistant Director of Planning in conjunction with the Ali Pridmore. Thank you.
I think there's a good point, Chairman, that you make.
Yes.
I'm slightly concerned that there appears to be a slightly vexatious element to this application and the relationships. So I would perhaps ask the planning officers to, extend because let's put it this way: in planning, you can only impose a temporary or put in place a temporary planning condition under very strict rules. They can't just be applied just because the committee is unsure of the outcome. So Ben, could you just remind the committee of what those rules are? I know it might take you a bit of time to dig them out. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but I've dealt with temporary planning consents. Some of them have related to wind turbines that I've known that have had temporary consents put on there for 25 years. I know that within the Broads Authority executive area, there have been temporary planning consents given on the basis of noise impact. But those have been not as short as 1 year. I think they've been 2 or 3 years to make sure that basically because the store business is a fledgling addition to the operation. I think that 1 year is perhaps too restrictive. I don't know what you think, Chairman, but yeah, Ben, if you could remind the committee of what those conditions are under which, you know, a temporary consent can be given, that would be helpful.
Certainly. So I think the test that we'd apply to any conditions are the same, whether it be a temporary permission or it be any of the conditions we would add, and those are the 6 tests, which obviously I'm now going to forget all of, but the key things in this instance for me are they reasonable and are they enforceable? You know, there's other parts of it, but they're the key ones for me. In this instance, if we put a 1 year temporary permission on, yeah, I think it would be enforceable because we'd have the relevant other conditions on that would mean that we could consider the scheme and any objections that come in and the noise report that then Ali and his team would look at. In terms of reasonable, there's the potential in this instance that if we get the noise impact assessment submitted to us, if we then put on the relevant conditions to limit the hours, and if we also get to the point of agreeing, even not through conditions, but to a change of the plans, that there's some sides added to it or something like that, that we wouldn't necessarily even need to add a temporary condition on it. So I think what we get into the point of is, would it be reasonable subject to all of those other things being okay? Perhaps not. So I think what I'd suggest is that if members were minded to delegate authority for me to look at this in consultation with the appropriate consultees and with the applicant, that we perhaps don't need to look at a temporary permission. I'm going to put one slight caveat on. If we look through it and there are some issues, perhaps we do look at a temporary permission as a need to do it. But I don't think we'll get to that point, would be my view. And just, you know, you don't need to hear this from me, but I'm going to say it anyway. We wouldn't have brought this to the members if we'd had a noise impact assessment at the appropriate time, so points are well taken. But if we'd had one, we wouldn't have brought it before you, because I think we would have got to the point where we're at now.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go with the proposal without a proposal for a temporary planning permission. Oh, sorry, Councillor Leggett.
Yes, could I just make the point that in reading the application and listening, there's a balance to me, but what I think has come over to me is that the amount of use and time and business agriculturally is certainly more than I anticipate when I read the application, and that gives me just the balance to go ahead with the recommendation with the delegation. So I would certainly also support. Oh yes.
Are we happy to go to the vote? So we have a proposal on the, oh, sorry.
Just a quick, so what are we voting on? Can we just clarify what the proposal is, please?
That's good.
So the proposal, as I understand it, but please correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're going to delegate authority to the Assistant Director of Planning to work with the applicant to secure a noise impact assessment. From that noise impact assessment, appropriate conditions would be added to any permission to ensure that hours of operation and other matters that may come out of that noise assessment are appropriately conditioned. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And that would definitely include the reinstatement for hedgerow.
So apologies, and the hedgerow, because that came up a bit later on. Can I just confirm though, so we don't go away and just look at various hedgerows, which hedgerow was it that we were referring to?
Okay, are we happy with the proposal? Okay, all those in favour, please raise your hands. So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. This planning application has been approved. Before we continue, does anyone want another short break, or are you happy to continue? Yep, five minutes. Okay, thank you.